It's about that time. We're on day 4. It's about that time. I don't know how to sing. I'm the one in karaoke that just be out there with a very bad voice, but some killer dancing moves. It's about that time. We are at day 4. Day 4 of my 30-day life challenge. My name is Francis. I realized I never introduced myself on these lives. But day 4, and the topic today is resistance. What are you resisting and why? So we're going to dive a little deep into this. I love talking about resistance because resistance tells us a lot. It gives us a lot of really amazing feedback that if we listen, we could actually take that and alchemize a lot of that resistance and turn it into something quite beautiful. So we're just going to get started. What is something that you're wanting to create, but you haven't created it? What is something that you're wanting to do, but you're having a hard time being really consistent with it? Or maybe there is a way in which you want to become something, but there is this block. There is something that's getting in the way of you actually doing the thing. Especially, you kind of know it's important. It sort of matters to you. There's a connectedness there, but you're just not doing it. Why? We're going to talk about that. Sometimes people call this procrastination. I'm going to get into procrastination and what I'm going to give an alternate reframe for what I believe procrastination is for a lot of folks. But I remember, resistance is such a huge thing for me, especially just trying to build better habits. I'm a type B personality. I'm not big on the labels, but I'm a type B personality. I'm not very rigid per se. Not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just I'm a little bit more lax. And so you couple that with resistance, you find yourself with some difficulties. And I remember, so resistance has always been a thing for me. And I remember in, I think it was 2017, 2018, about that time. And I wanted to create this, I just wanted to put myself out there. I was doing a lot of writing. I remember taking this blog course while I was living in Japan. And I got this site together and I was like, what should I call it? What should it be? And I remember reading this book called The War of Art. And it talks all about resistance. And I was like, oh my God, called me out. So I got a little boost. I got excited. But then I kind of I resisted. I put a site together. It was coming soon for I swear, it must have been a year. And I remember I was writing a lot of publications and I would have my, website link at the bottom of the article. I remember I got this interesting email from somebody. I don't know who it was, but I want to say thank you to that person. I probably will never know who it was. And in that email, it just had 2 words. And the 2 words were just start. That was it. And so for a long time, I had this thing and desire to create define resistance, catch the name there. And I just wasn't doing it. And I believe the reason why I was hesitating on doing it is just, I didn't feel like I was ready. I felt like there was so much more that I need to learn. I felt like I wasn't good enough. So there was a lot of insecurities there. I'm like, who am I to kind of put this thing together? What do I know about this thing? But I knew I wanted to create a space to sort of inspire people and connect people and get them moving, right? But me, here I was having the same, struggling with my own resistance. And so after I got that email, I was like, you know what, just whatever. I published the site and I started just putting myself out there more, talking about things and inspiring and encouraging folks. But, I realized this is a universal thing. A lot of us struggle with resistance to a certain degree, and there's different levels to it, right? We have those folks who, I got to get it perfect, right? It has to be perfect before I actually do this thing. And perfectionism is really, really deep insecurities about not feeling good enough. I actually was having a recent conversation with my sister about perfectionism. And I said, one thing about perfectionism is that you have this idea in your mind that it has to be perfect before I actually do this thing. But there's nothing that you're perfecting because some of us haven't really created the thing to perfect, or it's half created, or it's not maybe fully developed. And I use fully very loosely, because sometimes you can just create something or develop something and just get started, and you could tweak it and adjust it later. But perfectionism is really a deep-seated fear of just not being good enough, right? So perfectionism is a lie. There's no such thing as getting anything perfect. It's just a barrier between you and putting yourself out there and putting yourself in front of, putting your work out there to be looked at, quote unquote, judged, all of those things. And that can be a very scary place for a lot of us. And so I realized that, resistance just comes in so many different forms for us, and there's different levels to it. Like, we know something is good for us, or we would fully benefit from this thing, but we're just not doing it. Or like, we'll get it to later, and later never comes. Or we know we have all these gifts and talents, like somebody just put in the chat, but you're just not doing it. You're not giving it to the world. So you begin to self-sabotage, right? Or, resistance is that little voice that says that I'm just going to get in the way of all your dreams. It's you, resistance, and your dreams. And you're kind of looking over the horizon like, there it is, but resistance is just getting in the way. Resistance is that little voice that says, it'll never work out. Who am I to do this thing? It's just not going to happen. And so, at some point you realize that this is a thing. And so you try to maybe tackle it. You try to make some changes, but then you become defeated, right? And so you kind of get stuck in that starting, stop, resistant loop. And so you become pretty defeated. And so you quit. And then quitting becomes a habit, right? And then the cycle continues. And then a year later, you find yourself like, damn, I never started or accomplished that thing. And then you start beating yourself up again. And so you kind of get you see where I'm going with this. You really get stuck in that loop, and resistance is really just fear. I always say the bigger the thing it is, the stronger you're connected to it, the bigger the resistance. And resistance are all those thoughts that are telling you that you're an imposter, right? So it's those negative core beliefs that you probably adopted from somebody else, because we're not born with a lot of these belief systems. They're pretty much implanted in us by either our parents, caregivers, teachers, whomever you come across on your journey. And we hear it enough that we start to believe that it's true. So usually when I work with clients, I'm like, okay, well, what did you first hear that? Because that's not your original voice. That's not their original being, right? And so you really have to question some of the thoughts that are coming in and ask yourself and trace it back to where it came from. Because once you understand where that core belief comes from, then you can challenge it. Like, is it really accurate, or is it really a distorted depiction of who somebody else told you you were? And so let me know in the chat if resistance is a thing for you. I definitely suggest rereading The Art of War. No, The War of Art. I always get them mixed up. The War of Art, not The Art of War. But one of the questions I always ask is, ask yourself, what am I avoiding and why? Why am I avoiding this thing? And get deep, right? Because on the surface level, it seems like, I gotta, let's say just putting a website together. I gotta research domains, and I gotta, maybe find somebody to help me. And that's why I'm resisting it. But really, on a deeper level, is that really why you're resisting the thing? Often, I think my connection went out. Often we're resisting things that feel uncomfortable. They're unpleasant. We may avoid having difficult conversations. We avoid tasks that we don't typically like to do, or anything that makes us feel super anxious. So ask yourself, what is it about this thing that you're avoiding? Often, sometimes when we're avoiding something, it could be a skill gap. So I remember I had this client who wanted to open up this boutique hotel, but she was avoiding doing some of the things, even though she had the land, she had investors. But the resistance was telling her, who are you to do this thing? You don't know anything about opening up hotels. You don't know anything about the hotel industry. And it was as simple as, if there's something that you don't know, then what skill can you learn to fill that gap? Very simple. What is one thing that I can learn that will make me feel a bit more empowered to take the first step? Because sometimes it's just a skill gap. Because once you learn that skill, you're going to feel a bit more confident to move forward, right? So a lot of this stuff just gets stuck in our head. And that fear and that anxiety, they don't like logic. And in a minute that you start putting logic into it, it dims down. So I always say, I used to work with kids a lot, and I used to tell them to put their thoughts on trial, literally. Have a whole conversation with your thoughts and say, where's the evidence for what you're trying to say right now? And often when you're able to challenge some of these thoughts, you will find that there's so much inaccuracies in those those belief systems. And once you tap into those inaccuracies, you can actually move forward. And so resistance really is a huge barrier for change, because we can get really stuck in that resistance cycle. And it's also a huge barrier for creation. I always say that the Creator created creators. We're all creators. We're here to create. And so when we're not creating, we're going against the natural order of things. We're going against our true essence of what we're here to do. And creation comes in many different forms, right? It's not just like, oh, I'm an artist and that's how I create. But people create on so many different levels, whether it's with their ideas, with their innovations, the tech, whatever, right? Even if it's just planting a garden, right? Those things matter. And so when you allow resistance to take form, what happens is you dim that creation. And when you dim that creation, it creates anxiety, fear, and negative self-talk, right? We start to just talk ourselves out of things before they actually begin. And it's so crucial to really catch that in the act, because what happens is a lot of these things become habits. As much as we think, oh, it's just something I believe, it's something that you trained yourself to believe over time, right? And as much as something is a habit, we can actually break that habit and actually teach ourselves and to learn new things so that we can counter some of these negative habits, right? I always say, if you learn something, you can unlearn it, you could change it, you can do so much with it so that you can actually move forward. But again, I want to talk about actually procrastination, because it's a huge thing for a lot of folks. Huge thing for me. Sometimes I get into my resistance mode and I have to ask myself, okay, what's really going on? I always tell my clients, check in with yourself, put a hand on your heart, and just kind of feel things out. What is it that you really need today? Because what happens is we spend all day fighting with resistance, creating a lot of mental clutter, and then we get emotionally and mentally exhausted from that conversation, from that inner conversation. And the best thing to do is just to pause and work with your energy. If you don't feel like doing something at that moment, honor that, right? Honor that, and then make a promise to yourself that, okay, I'm going to take this time to whatever, go for a walk, read a book, anything else. And then when I come back, I will begin one small thing. And so procrastination to me is about self-regulation. When we begin to procrastinate on something, it's usually because we're overwhelmed. It's not because we're lazy. I don't believe that. It's our body and our minds and our bodies just telling us that we need to regulate because we're feeling overwhelmed in this time. And so you need to honor that overwhelm and figure out how to decrease that overwhelm. And sometimes, like I said, it could be just going for a walk or breaking these tasks into very small tasks, right? I always say, whatever is really hard to do, in what micro way can I do it, right? What is the smallest possible way that I can do it? I had this client who wanted to get into journaling. And, often we hear all these these morning routines. These are the 5 things you got to do in the morning so that you can have a beautiful day and all this stuff. We get caught up with other people's narratives, and we have to find what works for us, right? We can't do what works for other people, what we heard or what we read in a book. We have to do what's in resonance for us. And she did want to, create a journaling habit. And she's like, I just can't do it. I can't find myself to do it. I pick up the book and then I get distracted. I do all these other things. And then I was like, well, before you get out of bed, why don't you just do voice notes? It doesn't have to look a certain way. It could look your way, right? And that was a game changer for her. She could lay in bed, she could talk all she wanted in voice notes, and she was done. Okay? And that's how she developed the habit. So sometimes the things that we're trying to do, sometimes we have to make it fit our energetic lifestyle, make it fit what we like to do. I mean, don't do something if it really doesn't feel good, or at least get yourself in that feel good energy so that you could actually do it. Because there are going to be times where there's certain things we just got to do, right? We're adults. There are certain things we just got to do to just be responsible for ourselves. And so it's like finding that balance. But if you spend most of your life or throughout your day fighting against everything, it's going to be really, really exhausting. So procrastination is really just our bodies protecting us and telling us that we need to decrease the overwhelm so that that feeling can subside, so that we can move with a bit more clarity and more energy. So honor that procrastination and get curious and find out what it's trying to tell you, because our emotions are simply feedback. And the more that we listen to it, the more we'll know what to do next, or how to be, or what we need to honor and feel in that moment. So one of the things I always say, just like another thing about resistance is obviously we know it's fear. So the next question is what am I afraid of? And be honest with yourself. I think often we get a bit embarrassed by being honest with our fears, and we don't want to feel judged. But it's through that authenticity that's going to allow you to move forward. So many people are so busy wearing masks. I implore you, encourage you to take the mask off, because that mask weighs heavy. So in the process of you sort of resisting the thing, ask yourself, what are you truly afraid of? Because fear is a common source of resistance, and it really does prevent us from taking action, keeps us stuck in a state of inaction. And so ask yourself, what is the root of that fear? And I usually tell my client, once you have an answer, tell yourself, what else? What else? And just keep going and keep going, because usually it's often related to, obviously, failure, rejection, or maybe uncertainty. And then once you identify that fear, you can actually work to overcome it, because again, fear doesn't like logic. So we can actually throw some logic at it really quickly. And that can help reduce some of that fear. And sometimes there are legitimate fears. So address those fears. Tim Ferriss, actually, he's a very popular podcast guy, and he's written a couple of books, 4 Hour Work Week. And one of the things that he does is he creates a fear-based plan. Imagine that. Not to obsess over it, but literally write down all the fears that you have around this one thing. And then ask yourself, and go through that list. Is this true? Is it possible? If it is, then what? It's a bit of a strategy thing, so I don't want you to be too obsessed in your head, per se, because it really takes you out of that feeling space, and the feeling space is so important. But it's kind of a logical way to work through fear, especially when you're emotionally hijacked by fear, by writing that fear-based plan. Because then you could say, all right, if the worst thing that could happen is, for example, I'll just do this live as a thing, because I don't like doing lives, right? And it makes me nervous. There's a little fear around that. And so I say to myself, again, I'll use me as an example. If my fear is that no one shows up, then what? Will I die? I have a friend of mine whose boyfriend always asks, you didn't die. So just keep going. I'm not going to die. If no one watches it, I'll still show up tomorrow. I think part of this fear, Brendan Bouchard said it really great, is that we're just afraid to start small. And that fear of starting small prevents us from doing anything. And you have to understand that at some point, everyone starts small. Heck, even Jesus started small, right? He was a kid at some point, whatever you believe. But, everybody has their transition, right? And so be okay with starting something really small. Be okay with starting something very messy, because that's how you perfect the art, for lack of a word, perfect. But that's how you build the skill set. That's how you build resilience. That's how I had a coach of mine that used to say, you got to put in the reps, And you might, when you originally started, that fear must have been like this, right? Or that fear of rejection might have been here. But as you continue to put in the reps, it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And part of this resistance is accepting that there is a bit of fear there, and that's okay. We're just going to work through it. Part of that is saying it might take me a few hours to actually, crack open a book or write that in that journal. That's okay. That's okay. I always say, do whatever you can in the smallest possible way, which means that if you want to create the habit of writing in your journal, maybe you're not doing it every day. Some people be like, especially with gym, right? I'm going to go to gym. I'm going to go to gym 5 days a week. I'm going to go in there for 2 hours. And you're not, right? Especially if this is a new habit. If it's a very new habit to you, it's not going to happen. So part of this is being realistic with your capabilities and your capacity. So if your capacity is at 5-10 minutes, honor that capacity, 5-10 minutes. And if it takes you 6 months to actually create a weekly habit, allow that 6 months to take place, because I always say slow progress is better than no progress, right? And so if you're able to, month 1, where it's once a month, month 2, twice a month 3, and you just do that slow build. I think a lot of people, because we're in such a society that just wants that quick fix, and we want to be perfect at everything, and we want to look a certain way because social status matters, and we just don't want to be looked at as messy, right? Not like in a negative way, but as if we don't have it all together. I'm gonna tell you right now, no one has it all together, okay? Some people might have a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of wisdom, a little bit of experience, but no one has the totality, right? And if you believe that we're all infinite beings here on this earth, there's a lot to learn, okay? And we're not going to learn it all in one lifetime. So enjoy the marathon for the journey that it is, and stop getting caught up with the sprinting mindset, because the sprinting mindset, that's all like programming. That doesn't even exist. Programming. A farmer who's taking care of his crops, imagine if you were to sprint through that process. Well, you already know, right? Because we have all the GMOs and all the all the food crops that are being poisoned by the speed mentality, right? And that's the stuff that we're sort of ingesting, right? So take your time as you are building whatever it is that you're building, whatever it is that you're creating. Take your time, and always know that through this process, it's all about giving yourself more grace in the process. Allow the unfolding to take place and take off all the masks that are preventing you from stepping into your purpose, and why you're here, right? We're not here to sit around on the sidelines and watch everybody else. That's what sports games are for, right? We're not here to be contained. So I really want you to think about what are the things and what are the barriers that are getting in the way, and just get to the root of it as much as you can, so that you can get the forward momentum going. We just need momentum. The first step is always the hardest, right? Once we get past that first step, now we have a point of reference that we can look back and say, oh yeah, I did that, and I know what that feels like to do that. Because as you sort of leveling up, because resistance is always going to be there, the intensity will change. And as you level up, There's going to be new challenges. There's going to be new kinds of resistance that takes place. But now you have a point of reference that say, okay, I was able to get through that part, through that level. I know that I can get through the next level. And so I always say resistance is like this dance that we got to do, right? We're just dancing with resistance. We're inviting it over like as a friend, sitting on the stoop, having a conversation with it and saying, what's going on? Why are you showing up today? What can I do to help you right now in this moment? And that's how we need to look at it, because the more that we like beat ourselves up. I remember I had a client who used to say, yeah, I don't know how to force myself to do, I forget what it was that she was doing. This was a while ago, but oh yeah, meditation. She's like, I don't know how to force myself to do meditation. You can't force yourself to do anything. That word force, what kind of frequency does that word have? Force. That doesn't sound like fun. I wouldn't be excited to wake up to force myself to do anything, right? And so we have to be mindful with the words that we choose. Are they inspiring us, or are they making us feel scared, nervous, or anxious? Like I wouldn't want to talk to myself like that. So be mindful of the word choices that you use to inspire you to, strengthen whatever skill sets that you're trying to strengthen, develop, and whatever habits that you're trying to develop. Be mindful of those words. And another thing I want to say about resistance, because this happens a lot. Well, I'll talk about that after, but the next thing I want to talk about is asking yourself what you really want. Sometimes resistance is there is because we're out of alignment. Like, it's just not the thing that we want to do. It's just not. And part of that is being honest, taking off the mask, and ask yourself, is this really what I really want to do? Maybe pursuing a goal or a dream that isn't really in alignment with our values or our desires. And so we're kind of just wasting time at this point, right? So ask yourself, in this moment that I'm resisting, is this something that I really, really want to do, and why? Why does it matter to you? So sometimes just clarifying your goals and your motivations can actually help you overcome the resistance so that you can stay focused on what matters the most. And the last thing I want to say about this, about resistance, is that there are going to be moments where you start and stop, and that's quite all right. Start and stop, because as you're building a habit, you're going to fall off the saddle quite a few times, and that's part of the process. I always say, as you're changing something, relapse is part of change, and accept that relapse is part of change, because what happens is that the relapse might in the beginning happen quite frequently, but over time, that relapse is going to lessen and lessen and lessen. And so we have to allow that process to take place and not beat ourselves up about it. So remember that relapse is part of change as you go into this process. And I think that's all about it. So remember that. Let's recap about resistance. So first, understand that procrastination isn't a bad thing. It's just your body telling you, hey, I really need to regulate my emotions from feeling overwhelmed. And so check in with yourself, listen to your heart, ask yourself what you need, and don't force the situation, and just flow in the direction of your energy. And second, be okay with starting small. Like Brendon Burchard said, it's okay. Because I think about like when I went overseas, I went to teach English overseas, and I looked around me. I was 35 years old. My son had gone off to college, and I was like, there's a lot of 21-year-olds here doing gap years. And I felt really out of place. And because of how I felt out of place, it prevented me in the beginning to really connect with other people and to fully immerse myself in that experience. And I'm glad I eventually got over it and was able to have a phenomenal experience. But in that space, I felt really small. I felt like, what am I doing? Am I having like a midlife crisis here? Probably, yeah. Right. And so I had to sort of work through a lot of identities that I had adopted over the years so that I can truly, fully enjoy this next unfolding in my life. And so sometimes we need to accept where we are right now so that we can actually create the space and the lifestyle that we're looking to have. So I'm just encouraging you is just be curious and find out what are you resisting and why, and get deep And that's all I got for y'all. Let's see if there's any questions here. All right, somebody said, for me, it's walking in my gift. I just won't do it. Yeah, that's a whole process. You know, if you say you won't do it, then most likely that belief system becomes your reality, right? So part of that is changing how you talk about the things that you want to create and how you talk about your dreams and yourself. Thank you for watching. I will be back tomorrow. I'm actually doing a live with Miss Lily tomorrow, so keep a lookout for that on my stories. And thank you for watching, and I will see y'all next time. Take care.